problem specific. So we're going to be looking at question number 6 on module 19. We're going to be talking about ABC, activity-based costing versus traditional costing, trying to come up with the numbers to analyze that. So let's take a look. Go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So I'm looking here, activity-based costing. And we're going to look at 19.22 is the exercise in the book. And if you're looking for the reference, it's on page 19-26. And you'll see this question. So our goal is to fill out the tables and figure out, using traditional costing, using activity-based costing. Now, traditional costing is an easier number to work with. It's more convenient because you only have one factor you're looking at. It might be labor hours, it might be labor dollars, whatever it is, you're multiplying that to get your overhead. With activity-based costing, you're still looking for overhead, but you have much more detail of different activities associated with that and cost drivers that you see. So it's going to be a more accurate way of calculating overhead. With the trends that we've talked about of labor being less important and automation being more important, overhead costs are going to be going up and labor is going to be less of an emphasis. So the catch is, if you're using labor hours and that's less emphasized, it might get more distorted as you go, which makes for an advantage to using activity-based costing. The downside of activity-based costing, it's a lot of work. So there's a lot of numbers to calculate and a lot of things to review. So we're going to go through and we're going to do the analysis of trying to figure out what our costs associated are with what we're doing. So let's go ahead and if we're trying to figure out, we've got units, 1,000 and 7,000, we've got batches, we've got batch moves, direct materials, direct labor. So we're trying to come up with total costs per unit associated. And it says use 8.47 for an overhead rate calculation. So we'll take advantage of that. And we'll go ahead and take a look at what we're trying to do. So if we're looking at total costs, we have, well, we'll do a little spreadsheet creation. Okay. And let's see, I've got total costs and a cost per unit. So how do we calculate that out? So let's create a little spreadsheet here. I'm going to go into Excel, come up with a little template. I'm trying to figure out what we do. So what are we analyzing? We have, and I, yep, we're going to share. We have materials. We've got labor. We've got overhead. We have number of units to go with it. Then we have a cost per unit. And what do they say was the factor we wanted to use for our overhead was 8.4708. Overhead rate. 8.0748. So if we're going to do that, we want to see what do our materials look like here. Okay, and so we have total materials, total labor, total overhead for the gas cooker and charcoal. So let's go over to see what we have here. Gas cooker, materials, labor, and we'll do an overhead calculation. So we've got our total. Okay, so if we're looking to analyze, we're going to be looking at our, figured out the number of units for 1,000. Let's see, we have gas cooker. 1,000 units. Right. 1,000. Do it again. 0, 0, 0. We have charcoal. $7,000. And our materials were direct materials 50,000 and direct labor 20,000. So if we're looking at that, we're trying to figure out what the total materials associated with our units. So we're looking at total cost of doing all this stuff. Oh, I'm looking at a different valuation, but I've got different numbers in mind because I'm trying to analyze it. So we got cost of units, 4,000 units. All right, so I've got total labor, total materials. I'm analyzing my materials and my labor. So what did I say materials look like? 50,000 materials and 20,000 labors. Let's go ahead and pop that on our spreadsheet. 50,000, 20,000. And then the same thing for my 100,000 and 28,000. And then we're looking for overhead. And the overhead we need to calculate. If you look here, we're told by our total overhead and activities, we can use a factor that says, we're going to say the factor to use 8.47 for our overhead rate calculation. So if we're going to use 8.47, we can multiply that. Usually, I think you'd say whether it's based on labor or based on materials. Guessing it's based on direct labor. So we're going to go ahead and use our calculation for overhead. I'm going to use my overhead calculation equals my labor times my factor. Here. One here. And yep. And then we have our total number of units. It was 1,000 and 7,000. I'll put it in the row here. I want the total costs. Sum here of the numbers above. And we're going to take a total of these numbers here. Copy that over here. We're good to go. Number of units, we put them up here, but I actually should have put them down here. Do a cost per unit equals dollars, total dollars, divided by number of units. So if all goes well, those would be the numbers I'm looking for my cost per unit. Total cost, I gotta do one more thing on my spreadsheet and make a totals column here. Equals that. So if I format this all, and I may as well put it in decimal format. I'll put 2 decimals on here, just for kicks. Comment in there so it's easier to read. And that's what we get. So we have a total cost of 585, 590, 40. All goes well. Cost per unit. Got gas 231.50. Cost per unit 50.58. So in theory, that should tell us, let's do a check and make sure I'm getting my numbers right. No, I didn't do that right, did I? What's my hole? What's my gap? Oh, I've got material. Let's go back over here.
Says round to the nearest dollar.
Okay. And 50, 128. Okay, so around nearest dollar. So that would make it 232 and 51, right? Let's do that with the dollar. And 232. Actually, let's see. Yep, that's 50 even. That'd be 51. Okay. Still don't like that. What does it not like?
I think you wrote the overhead rate wrong on your Excel spreadsheet.
Okay, I could do it. 8.4708. You are right. Thank you.
And I also have another question. So the problem that you're looking at right now has that hint for the overhead rate. Mine on my homework assignment doesn't have that number.
Does it have any number on there?
No, it doesn't have that hint. It just has the top tables.
Okay. Number machine. Then what we need to use is the full overhead calculated. So if you look at the full overhead. Okay, let's do that. Let's make it. Let's do an overhead analysis here. And by the way, let me go ahead and try to make these numbers different now. Let's see. So I've got a total cost of 604,598. Let's see if that'll take it. Okay. Got a 239.42, so 239. I got no decimal, right?
I think for the per unit cost, it wants it to the cent.
Okay, so we're gonna, it does want the cents, so 239.42.
The other one should be 52.17.
52.17, very good. Let's see if it likes that any better. It likes that a lot better. Okay, good catch, guys. Thank you. Keep me honest. Now, the other way to do that is if you're looking at the activity costs here. So materials acquisition inspection, $360,000. So we've got a total of 406,600. So if I take that 406,600 and I say, okay, I have what's my total labor cost here? I've got $48,000. Okay, so I've got labor total equals that plus that. And I have labor, my total overhead total. Now we have an overhead total on the problem here of 406,600. So I want to find out what percentage of my, what's the factor I need to multiply here to get this to work. So I'm going to multiply my labor dollars times an overhead rate. The overhead rate is going to be equal to it'll be dollars over dollars. So for every dollar I spend, how much overhead am I going to have? So if I have, we'll use a little algebra formula here. So if I have the formula I would create would look like, I take my overhead dollars, divide that by my labor dollars. And I'm going to have a rate that I can multiply to get my number I can multiply labor dollars by. So I'm going to take my overhead dollars and divide that by my labor total, and I get 8.47. Now I can take that 8.47 number, which it fed, and now I can use that to multiply by labor hours. So if I take my rate times, just rearrange the formula, labor hours equals overhead assigned in a traditional method. So I've got that one rate, that 847 rate, which I calculated. Right? Okay, we use the hint. Thank you very much. It gave me a hint. I don't need the hint because you could have figured this out by determining my total overhead. Because again, ABC is all about overhead. It's but how we allocate that overhead. ABC, activity-based costing, is a more accurate reflection in how we calculate that overhead. Does that make sense? So we're calculating overhead right now. 169,000 goes towards gas and 237 goes towards charcoal. Is that accurate? Well, if our labor is lower on the gas and higher on the charcoal, yeah, it's going to have that. It's going to have somewhat, but we're going to go through and that's how we get our overhead rates associated by multiplying our labor dollars times that 8.47 we calculated. But now we're going to go through and try to figure out what our overhead is for gas and for charcoal based on 4 criteria. Now, if we go back to those 4 criteria, I'm sorry, 3 criteria. We have material acquisition, we have material movement, and we have schedule, number of batches. So we need to go back and determine based on number of batches, based on number of moves, and then we have, so we got 360,000, 16,000, and then we have the scheduling that goes into that. So, first question I have though, does that help you calculate the oops. Are you comfortable with how I calculated the overhead on that?
I mean, Excel is fine and dandy, but
Yep.
The only thing we're going to have in front of us is pen and paper.
So
And that's why I just,
so you have to make this table.
Yeah, I fight not to use Excel because if I don't have it for the exam, I'm just going to be, I feel as a crutch and it just throws me off. So I had to go to paper.
I will say, I would encourage you to use Excel here on your problems and on your homework. Because if you're using pen and paper, you're spending a lot of time doing calculation. You're right, eventually you're gonna need to do that on the exam if you get to this point. We're gonna have some fairly simplistic numbers when we do the overhead calculation, ABC. It's gonna be elements. Remember how in the last exam or the last two exams, I said, okay, I don't want to give you a problem that's going to be 17 steps and come up with one answer. I'm going to give you a problem that you might have to calculate an overhead rate. So you're going to have to go through and look at the two labor numbers and look at the total cost, the total overhead and do this calculation down here. So you're going to get total labor, total overhead. I'm going to come up with a factor. That's going to be the exam question. I'm not going to say, compare the two, give me totals and break it down. So you should be able to, in a problem, use the spreadsheet. But as a preparation for your exam, say, okay, this portion I can do manually. I can combine those two numbers, 20 and 28,000. I can combine the three numbers here that are already given me, that's feeding me 4066. So I can go back here and say, I got 4066, I got 48,000. I can calculate a rate. But if you weren't doing that, if you didn't have a spreadsheet, because this is asking you other questions, what's the total cost? Oh, well, I got to get the total cost here, total it there, and then I got to get a per unit cost here. If you were doing that manually, you would have, this would have taken us an extra 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah, I felt that pain.
But I respect that you really, you want to tough it out and do it by hand. I'm going to try to discover that at every left turn. Because I want you to understand, this is going to help you with the concept. And just as you were able to tell me, I think you screwed up on your overhead rate, Scott. Yep, I did. I typed in the wrong rate. But had I done this manually on a piece of paper and I said, damn it, I just calculated 17 calculations. I mean, I probably should have done this first and not used what they fed us. And I would have come up with 8.47 and life would have been good. Real quick, we would have been done. But because I typed in I fed a number and we make mistakes. So this is probably a good example of making a mistake. And I made one of those mistakes and that happens. That's par for the course. That is going to happen. Okay, so we're going to go through and now we're going to do the table of cost drivers to come up with our overhead. So if we're going to go through and say, let me see what I got here. I've got the activity, the cost, and the driver. So let's do activity, cost, and driver. And then we'll have the rate to go with that. So what's the activity that I'm looking at? I'm going to start with materials acquisition inspection. Total cost is going to be 360,000. The driver is direct material cost. And then I'm going to go to movement, material movement. And what have I got there? 16.6. And the driver associated with that is number batch move. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to have scheduling 30,000 and number batches total. All right. And if I do that, I've got my dollar amount 360, 16.6. I'm actually about that. I'm going to actually try to figure out the calculation of per direct materials, per batch moves, per batches. So now I'm going to go in and say, well, what are the total number of direct materials I need to pop on this, on the spreadsheet. And so based on my direct materials, my total direct materials of,
Be $1.50, wouldn't it?
I think so, let's go take a look. My total direct materials, that's on the spreadsheet, I already have it, don't I?
Mm-hmm.
My total direct materials here were 150, you bet. Okay. Now batch moves, I have to look at the table. They gave us a batch.
Wasn't it 70 for moves? No,
Total
100.
of batch moves of 100. And then number of batches in total
50.
of 50, 40 and 10. So now I'm going to get a calculation of dollars per whatever. Take that divided by that. So my total material dollars times 2.4. I'll copy that formula down here. And so now I've got 2.4, 166, and 600. So for every batch, I get $600 associated. For every batch move, I got 166. And for direct materials, I got to multiply by 2.4. So now I'm going to have to come up with a table that's going to look at my material, labor, overhead, just to do another table based on my overhead costs being isolated and separated. So to do that, I'm going to go down here and say, yeah, I'm going to take, I'm going to go ahead and multiply. I'm going to copy this down. That's going to be the same here, materials, labor. I'll put that down here. But now I'm going to have different overhead. And you know what? I may as well put those numbers up here. Sure. Put my, get them on the spreadsheet so I can have my batches and batch moves. 40, 10, and 80, 20. Batches, batch moves. 40, 10, 40, 10, 80, 20, total. Okay. So what's my overhead going to be? I'm going to have these particular items here. Overhead items, individual.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to look at my, start with gas. And what do I do for acquisition? I'm going to have equals my materials times 2.4. I'm going to do the same thing here, equals materials times 2.4. So that's just the overhead associated with acquisition. Okay. Notice my materials up here. I had 365 and 239. I'm sorry, that's total cost. I had 237 and 169 already. Did I do that right? Oh, it's not looking high to me. Materials for 2000. Materials times 2. Well, see, let's go see what else is coming down the pipe. Might have to divide that out. Okay.
Wouldn't it be 80 by 166 by your number of moves?
I would use 80 by, correct. So I'm going to take my, what's that? Times 66. Material movement. And I'll do this. What's that? times the same. And then I go down here. Schedule is going to be done based on number of batches. Equals
50 by 6, 30,000.
40 batches,
40,000, sorry. 24,000.
600. I'm going to equal 10 batches times 600. I'm just going to do total overhead. Let's do a check figure here. Just going to do equal. So do a sum, which going to do a quick that. Here. What do I have for total overhead? 406,598. Let's see if I do get something close here. So I got 406,600. So you'll notice that my total overhead, other than $2, I've got some rounding errors, is a match for what's going on up here. Right? I have the same total overhead, but I have the allocation different. I have 170.57 instead of 169, and I have 249 instead of 237. So I'm allocating a little bit more to my charcoal, a little bit less to my gas. And the importance of this is when you're doing pricing evaluations. You're going in and saying, okay, what's my cost? What's my price per unit? Okay, so I'm going to actually do total cost equals overhead plus labor plus materials. Copy that over here. Total cost. Copy that down here. 604,600, which comes pretty close to 604,598. We're still off $2. Not too worried about $2. Right. Now we're doing a cost per unit. Equals dollars divided by units. Then we're going to go over here, calculate there. And so if I go back to the problem at hand, and go down to my total cost, what I came up with is 605,500. Different 605. Right, yep. I'm sorry, total cost 604,600. And my per unit was 227.28. And my per unit came out to 53.90. Check that. We're pretty close. There we go. So we're looking at this saying, this is 239 per unit cost for the gas cooker versus 227. If I was trying to price this gas cooker, and I'm saying, you know what, I just want to price it 10% over cost. Or I have a competitor that can make them that's a pretty similar cost structure. My activity-based costing is going to be a more accurate reflection, a more accurate number of what I'm doing here, of what I figured out. So my gas cooker costs 227. So I have a little more flexibility. I can actually drop my price a little more, but I have less flexibility with the charcoal smoker, which I produced a whole bunch more. I've got 7,000 of those things versus 1,000. Sometimes these differences can even be more stark. You might be evaluating and you might be in a situation where, well, I'm making two different kinds of units. And I've got a high volume, what I think is high margin, a low margin. And I've got a low volume, I think is high margin. But you realize the low volume also takes more setup time. It takes more overhead time. And the ABC activity-based costing methodology is going to give you a higher level of costs for a smaller batch. And then you realize that, well, I can't make more money on these because this is a small batch item, I'm still making my money on the high volume item or vice versa. So the whole idea is like, it's the same amount of overhead, but activity-based costing is just giving you the allocation of that overhead in a more accurate fashion. Does that make sense? Sierra, I know you had the original question. Hopefully that answers and gives you a highlight of how that comes together.
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Okay, thank you for asking. Because you're right, there's a lot that goes into that. I want to make sure the understanding. I remember when I first learned this and I said, these numbers, where are they coming from? Until it snapped that, oh, this is the same overhead, whether I'm doing it with one factor, traditional costing, or with 7 different activity bases. It's the same total overhead number I'm using. I mean, today it was $2 difference, but it's basically the same number. And that's a more effective way of allocating. There's a whole bunch more work when you get down to it, because you have to calculate those individual. I mean, we were fed the numbers pretty nicely. Okay, but there's still more calculation to go. Hopefully that highlights what you need and gives you a better feel for what's going on. And I think we're on track. Other problems, other questions, anything else you might want to cover? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.